The sun out here in the Arizona territory doesn't just warm you. It tries to kill you. It bakes the ground until it cracks open like an old bone. And for Elonora Vance, pregnant and cast out, that felt about right. Her life was just as shattered. The people of Stone Creek, they had whispers sharper than any snake's fang and a heat crueler than any sun. They were branding her with a shame that was never hers to begin with. She was utterly alone, hunted by the memory of her dead husband, and hunted by the very real threat of the man who now controlled her future. But the desert is a strange place. Where the last dusty street of a town gives way to the wild, something else is always waiting. And for Eleonora, destiny didn't arrive in a fancy carriage. It came on a pinto pony with a rider whose eyes were as dark and ancient as the mountains themselves. He was a warrior, an Apache, an enemy to her people, and he was about to make her an offer that would be either her salvation or her final bloody ruin. The dust of Stone Creek was a part of Eleonora's dress now, a second skin, a constant, gritty reminder of who she was and where she stood. At the bottom of everything, the town was built on two things: finding silver and finding God. She'd been denied both. Her home was a shack at the edge of nowhere, a place her husband Thomas had built with his own hands before a rock slide in the Dragoon Mountains took him from her. It used to be a home. Now it was a cage. Her world had shrunk to the four flimsy walls of that shack and the long, terrible walk to the town mercantile. A walk she only made when the hunger gnawed so hard it was worse than the town's scorn. The whispers were always there. They followed her like flies. "There she goes," the preacher's wife would mutter, her voice a venomous hiss from behind a sack of flour. "Shameless. Swollen with a child that'll never know its father." They talked as if Thomas's death was her fault, a sin she'd committed, a stain that had spread from her to the memory of a man they once called a friend. But the truth was a whole lot uglier, a tangled mess of secrets and bad blood that Nora was only just starting to piece together. Thomas had been in business with the most powerful man in town, Cormac Lynch. They were chasing a silver claim, a big one, the kind of strike that makes men into kings. But Thomas died before the claim was filed, and the location of the mine died with him. Cormac Lynch, a man with a smile as cold as a grave marker, was convinced Thomas had hidden a map. And he was certain that Nora, the young widow, knew exactly where it was. Her pregnancy was the last straw. For Cormac, it was a problem. For the town, it was proof. Proof that she was a loose woman, a convenient excuse to hate the one person their leader so clearly despised. They didn't know. They didn't know the doctor had quietly told her to expect 2 heartbeats, not one. That these children were the last precious pieces of Thomas she had left. They were the only reason she was still breathing. Today the heat was a monster. You could see it shimmer above the baked earth. Nora clutched a small coin purse. It was nearly empty. Enough for some cornmeal, maybe a sliver of salt pork if Mr. Henderson at the mercantile felt like being a decent human being. He rarely did. He was Cormac Lynch's man, right down to his rotten teeth. She stepped onto the main street, and the world went quiet. Men on porches stopped whittling. Their knives went still. Women pulled their children in close, as if Nora's grief was a plague you could catch. She kept her eyes down, her belly a shield against their stares. Every step was a battle. The bell on the mercantile door jingled, a cheerful little sound in a world that had forgotten what cheer was. Mr. Henderson was behind the counter, polishing a jar with a greasy rag. He didn't bother to look up. "Henderson," she said. Her voice was too soft. He grunted. "What is it, Mrs. Vance?" He used her married name like a curse. "I need cornmeal, a little salt pork." He finally looked at her then. His eyes dropped to her belly with a look of pure disgust. "Credits run dry." Cormac was clear on that. "It's not for credit," she said, her cheeks burning. She tipped the few coins she had onto the counter. They made a sad, pathetic little clatter. "This is all I have." Henderson swept them into his hand without even counting. He moved slow, like a man who enjoyed every second of his tiny, pathetic power. He scooped a handful of cornmeal into a bag. He sliced off a piece of pork so thin you could see the light through it. He shoved the pathetic little package across the counter. It wasn't enough. It wouldn't last 2 days. Tears pricked at Nora's eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall. She would not give this town the satisfaction. She grabbed her meager supplies and turned to leave. And that's when she saw him, Cormac Lynch, leaning against the doorframe, blocking her way out. He was a tall man, dressed in a black coat even in this heat, handsome in a hard, cruel way. He held a silver-tipped cane, and he tapped it against the floorboards. Tap, tap, tap. "Elonora," he said, his voice as smooth as whiskey. "Leaving so soon?" The entire store went dead silent. "Mr. Lynch," Nora said, clutching her package, "please let me pass." "Patience is a virtue," he purred, stepping inside. The door swung shut behind him. He walked toward her, circling like a wolf. The only sound was the tapping of his cane. "We have unfinished business, you and I." "We have no business," she said, her heart hammering. "Thomas is gone." "Ah, but that's where you're mistaken," Cormac said, his cold eyes fixed on her. "My business was with our partnership and our assets. An asset which included a map to the Serpent's Tooth silver lode, a map I believe my dear departed partner left with his loving wife." "There is no map," she said, her voice shaking. It was the truth. Thomas had been a secretive man, but he'd never mentioned a map. He just hummed a strange little tune sometimes, a lullaby his mother had sung to him. But a map? Never. Cormac stopped right in front of her. His face was inches from hers. His breath smelled of whiskey and cloves. "Do not play me for a fool, Elonora. I have been patient. I've let you stay in that hovel out of respect for my partner. But my patience is at its end." He reached out and brushed a finger against her cheek. She flinched like he'd hit her. "That shack sits on land I own. The debt Thomas owed me is now yours. The map settles it." "I told you," she said, her voice rising with panic. I don't have it." His eyes went hard. The charming mask fell away. "Then you are of no use to me." He leaned in closer, his voice a venomous whisper. "I want you gone. Out of Stone Creek by sunset tomorrow. If I see your face in this town again, I will not be so courteous. The desert has a way of swallowing up problems, especially for a woman in your delicate condition." He straightened up, his smile returning as he turned to the silent onlookers. "A tragic situation, isn't it, Henderson? The poor thing has quite lost her senses." He tipped his hat to Nora, a gesture of pure mockery, and strode out of the store. The bell jingled. The store was silent for a moment. Then the whispers started again, this time with a sharp pity that was even worse than the hate. Nora stood frozen. Sunset tomorrow. He was casting her out into the wilderness, pregnant, alone. It wasn't a threat. It was a death sentence. She fled the store, running barefoot on the hot dust, not stopping until the door of her shack was bolted behind her. She sank to the floor, and the sobs finally came. Great, heaving waves of terror. She wrapped her arms around her belly, protecting the only thing she had left in the world. Thomas always said she was strong, stronger than she knew. But as the sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in brutal strokes of orange and red, Nora felt her strength dissolving into pure, uncut fear. To stay was to die. To leave was to face the desert. A slower death, but just as certain. As darkness fell, she packed what little she had: a spare dress, a half-empty canteen, a small knife. Before the sun even thought about rising, under the cold, indifferent light of the moon, Elonora Vance slipped out of Stone Creek and walked into the vast, waiting emptiness of the Arizona Territory. The desert at night is a different kind of monster. The crushing heat of the day gives way to a deep, biting chill that gets right into your bones. The moon was just a sliver of white in a black sky. It offered no light and even less comfort. Every rustle in the bushes, every skittering sound in the dark sent a jolt of pure fear through Nora. She was a town woman. The silence out here was a living thing, a predator. She walked east, away from Stone Creek. She had no destination, just away. She tried to follow what looked like an old miner's trail, praying it might lead to another town, a place where the name Cormac Lynch was just a bad memory. But the trail was a ghost. It would disappear for miles into fields of rock and cactus, their spines glowing like needles in the moonlight. By dawn, her feet were raw. Her canteen was half empty. The sun rose with a vengeance, and the assault began all over again. Rock, sand, skeletal trees. There was no shade, no water, no sign of life. Panic, cold and sharp, began to crawl up her spine. Cormac didn't need to send men after her. He just had to let the land do his dirty work. She was a fool to think she could survive this. The weight of the babies felt like an anchor, pulling her down, draining the last of her strength. By midday, the sky started to curdle. Dark, bruised-looking clouds gathered on the horizon, moving with a terrifying speed. The air grew thick, heavy. A distant rumble echoed through the canyons. A summer storm. In town, it would have been a blessing. Out here, it was just another way to die. The first drops of rain were huge and cold. They hit the parched earth with a hiss. Within minutes, it was a deluge. The wind howled, whipping sand and rain into a blinding fury. The dry ground turned to slick, running mud. The dry creek beds she'd crossed hours ago were about to become raging rivers. She saw a shallow overhang on the side of a small mesa and scrambled for it. It wasn't much, but it was something. She huddled underneath, shivering as the storm unleashed its full power. Lightning split the sky, followed by cracks of thunder so loud they vibrated through the rock she was pressed against. The world was gone, erased behind a gray curtain of rain. She must have drifted off, lost in exhaustion and fear, because she didn't hear him approach. One moment she was alone, the next he was there. He sat on a pinto pony, a horse that stood perfectly still in the middle of the chaos. The man was Apache. There was no mistaking it. The high cheekbones, the long dark hair held back by a leather band. The buckskin clothes dark with rain. A rifle was sheathed at his side. He was the savage from the stories they told back in Stone Creek, the devil of the wilderness. Nora's blood went cold. She tried to make herself smaller, to disappear into the rock. Her hand went to the small knife in her waistband, a pathetic, useless gesture. The warrior dismounted with a fluid grace. He didn't draw his rifle. He just stood there a dozen feet away, his dark eyes locked on her. He studied her torn dress, her bleeding feet, and the swell of her belly. His gaze lingered there, and for just a second, Nora saw something flicker in his eyes. It wasn't pity, it was something older, a shadow of some deep, ancient sorrow. The silence between them was louder than the storm. This was it. This was how it ended. Fleeing one monster, only to be found by another. He took a slow step forward. She flinched, her knuckles white on the handle of her knife. He stopped. He raised a hand, palm open, a sign of peace. Then he spoke, and the sound of his voice was the most shocking thing of all. It wasn't a guttural cry from a foreign tongue. It was English, deep and measured. "You are not safe here," he said, his voice calm and clear over the wind. "The flash floods will fill this wash soon." Nora could only stare, dumbfounded. Fear had stolen her voice. He seemed to understand. He didn't move closer. "My camp is nearby. It is dry. You will be safe there." Her mind reeled. An Apache warrior offering her shelter? It had to be a trick, a trap. But then another bolt of lightning lit up the landscape, and she saw the water rising below. A muddy, churning torrent, already creeping towards her. He was right. To stay here was to drown. He saw the war in her eyes. "I will not harm you," he said, and there was a quiet sincerity in his voice that was impossible to ignore. He gestured back the way he had come. "It is a short ride. My horse can carry us both." She looked from the rising water to the stoic warrior. A certain death in the flood, or a possible death at the hands of this man. But there was something in his eyes, a stillness. And more than that, there was the primal, desperate need to protect the lives she carried inside her. For them, she had to take the chance. Slowly, she pushed herself to her feet. Her legs trembled. She took a hesitant step forward, her eyes locked on his, watching for any sign of a trick. He just waited, patient as stone. When she was close enough, he moved with a surprising gentleness, helping her onto the pinto's back before swinging up behind her. His presence was a solid, warm weight against her. He smelled of rain, leather, and wood smoke, a clean, earthy scent. He clicked his tongue, and the horse began to move. picking its way through the rising water as if it were taking a stroll. Nora closed her eyes, clutching the horse's mane. She was surrendering her fate to a stranger, an enemy, the very embodiment of everything she'd been taught to fear. And as the horse carried her deeper into the wilderness, she could only pray she hadn't just traded one death sentence for another. The ride was short, but it felt like crossing into another world. He led the horse up a winding, barely visible path into a hidden box canyon. The walls rose up on three sides, a natural fortress against the storm. Tucked under a deep overhang was a small, simple camp. A well-built wickiup made of branches and hide, a protected fire pit, and a few animal pelts laid out on the dry ground. The warrior slid off the horse, then reached up to help her down. His hands were strong and steady at her waist. He let go the second her feet touched the ground. He led her to the fire, which smoldered with a low heat, and gestured for her to sit on a dry deerskin. She huddled close to the warmth, the shivering finally starting to fade. He moved around the camp with a quiet efficiency, tending to his horse, adding a piece of dry wood to the fire. He didn't speak, and his silence wasn't threatening. It was thoughtful. It gave Nora time to really look at him. He was younger than she first thought, not much older than Thomas had been, but there were lines of grief etched around his eyes, lines that spoke of a deep, settled pain. This wasn't the bloodthirsty savage from the stories. This was a man carrying a heavy weight. After a few minutes, he sat on the other side of the fire. He took a leather pouch from his belt and offered it to her. Inside were strips of dried venison. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the smell hit her. Her pride fought with her hunger for a second, but her body won. She took a piece, her hand trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a slight nod. "You must eat, for your child." He paused, his gaze steady. Then he corrected himself. "Children." Nora froze, the jerky halfway to her mouth. "How did you know?" "My wife," he said, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "She was the same. Her belly was large, like the summer moon. She carried twins." A profound sadness washed over his face, so raw and real that Nora felt an unexpected sting of empathy. "Was?" she asked softly. "A fever took her and our son a year ago. Our daughter followed a week later." He spoke the words flatly, like a man reciting a history he had memorized through pain. This Apache warrior, this man of the wilderness, was just like her, haunted by loss. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the drumming of the fading rain. "Why did you help me?" Nora finally asked. "Your people and mine. We are not friends." The warrior looked up from the fire, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Your husband was my friend." The words hit Nora with the force of a physical blow. She stared at him, utterly bewildered. "My husband? Thomas? That's not possible. He was a prospector. He never—" She trailed off, realizing how little she truly knew about his life out in those mountains. He would be gone for weeks, returning with dust on his clothes and a faraway look in his eyes. "His name was Thomas Vance," the warrior said. "He had hair the color of the sun after a storm and eyes the color of the sky before it. He was a good man." He paused. "2 winters ago, my leg was broken in a fall. A mountain lion had cornered me. I was weak. I was preparing to die. He found me. He shot the cat. He did not see an Apache. He saw a man who needed help. He splinted my leg. He shared his water. He stayed with me for 2 days until my brother found us. He saved my life." Nora listened, spellbound. This was a side of Thomas she had never known. He was kind, yes, but this was something else entirely. "My name is Kyle," the warrior continued. "After that day, Thomas and I met many times in these hills. We learned from each other. I taught him the ways of the mountain. He taught me more of your language. He spoke of the town, of the greed that poisoned it, and he spoke of you." Nora's breath caught in her throat. "He spoke of me?" "Often," Kyle said, a faint, sad smile on his lips. "He said you were his anchor, the good, clean thing in a world of dust and lies. He was building a life for you." Kyle's gaze drifted back to the fire. "We made a promise, as brothers. If harm should befall one of us, the other would look after his family. I swore an oath to him that I would protect you, and his children. It was all too much. Her husband, friends with an Apache warrior, a secret oath. The man sitting across from her wasn't a random stranger. He was here because of a sacred promise to the man she loved. The world tilted on its axis once more. "The man who drove you from your home," Kyle said, his voice hardening. "The one they call Cormac." Thomas spoke of him. He said he was a man with a hollow soul, filled only with greed. Thomas did not trust him. "Cormac thinks Thomas left a map," Nora explained, the words tumbling out now. "A map to a silver lode. He threatened me. He said he'd have me driven into the desert to die." Kyle nodded slowly, his expression grim. "The serpent's tooth." "Yes, Thomas found it. But there is no paper map." The map was in his head. He knew the greed of men like Cormac. He would never write it down. He looked at her then, his gaze intense. He saw not just a frightened woman, but the wife of his friend, the mother of his friend's children. He stood up and walked to the edge of the shelter. The storm had broken. The air was clean and cool. He turned back to her, his decision made. "Your world has cast you out," he said, his voice quiet but full of authority. "It will not protect you. It will not shelter your children. Cormac will not stop hunting you. His greed is a sickness without a cure." He took a step towards her. This time she didn't flinch. His presence was no longer a source of fear. It was a strange, budding hope. "My wife and children are with the spirits now. My life is an empty house. Thomas gave me back my life. Now I will honor his. I will be the protector he cannot be. I will raise his children as my own. I will teach them to be strong, to survive in this land." He stopped right in front of her, his shadow falling over her. His face was a mask of solemn duty. "Elonora," he said, speaking her name for the first time, "come with me. Your children need a father." News of Eleonora's disappearance spread through Stone Creek like a slow poison. At first there was just relief. The problem had solved itself. Cormac Lynch stood on the saloon porch, sipping his finest whiskey, accepting the quiet congratulations from the townsfolk. He'd cleansed their community. He was a pillar of strength. But as the days crawled by with no sign of her, Cormac's satisfaction began to curdle into a cold, simmering rage. He hadn't just wanted her gone. He'd wanted her broken. He'd imagined her crawling back, desperate, begging, ready to trade the location of the serpent's tooth for a scrap of mercy. Her defiance, this silent act of choosing the desert over him, was an insult he couldn't stomach. And it was rooted in something much deeper than a business deal. Cormac had a younger sister, Clara. She had been Thomas Vance's first wife, a frail, gentle woman who had died giving birth to a stillborn son. Cormac had always blamed Thomas, a quiet, festering resentment that Thomas had survived while his sister had not. When Thomas, after a year, had brought home a new wife, Elonora, vibrant and strong, Cormac's resentment had bloomed into a bitter, jealous hatred. In his twisted mind, Elonora was a usurper, living a life that should have been his sister's. The silver lode wasn't just about money. It was his birthright, his way of taking back what he felt Thomas had stolen from his family. "She's gone," said Gideon, Cormac's younger brother, a nervous man who was always sweating. "Probably coyote bait by now. We should just forget her." Cormac slammed his whiskey glass down on the bar. Gideon jumped. "Don't be a fool, Gideon. That woman is the only link to a fortune that could buy this entire territory. Thomas was clever, damn him. She knows something. She has to." He paced the length of the saloon, the silver tip of his cane clicking in angry rhythm on the floorboards. He needed a different kind of tool. Intimidation was useless now. He needed a predator, a man who could read the desert like a book and held human life in as much contempt as he did. There was only one man for that job. He sent a telegraph to Tucson. 2 days later, a man rode into Stone Creek who made the other hard men in town look like choir boys. His name was Sterling. He was a gaunt, leathery man with eyes so pale they looked like they'd been bleached by the sun. He moved with a quiet, unnerving efficiency. He was a tracker, a bounty hunter, and it was whispered. A former Army scout discharged for being too brutal during the Apache Wars. Cormac met him in his private office. He laid a map on his desk. "She's out there somewhere. Cormac said. A woman alone and very pregnant can't have gone far. Sterling ignored the map. His pale eyes were fixed on Cormac. What's she worth to you? He asked, his voice a dry rasp. Find her, Cormac said. Bring her back unharmed. $500. Sterling gave a short, mirthless laugh. For 500, I'll find her. Whether she's unharmed is between her and the terrain. He leaned forward. But you don't just want the woman, do you, Mr. Lynch? A man like you doesn't pay that kind of money for a runaway widow. You want what she knows. Cormac felt a chill. This man saw right through him. She has information I require. It becomes my business when you hire me, Sterling countered. Double the fee, $1,000. And I want to know exactly what I'm looking for. It makes her predictable. Cormac hesitated, then gave in. He needed this man. She knows the location of a silver strike, a big one. There might be a map, but more likely it's in her head. Sterling nodded slowly, a flicker of interest in his dead eyes. Greed was a language he understood. 1,000 it is. Half now. Cormac counted out the gold coins, hating every clink. Sterling pocketed the money and walked to the map. He drew a circle around Stone Creek. She left on foot 2 nights ago, he mused more to himself than to Cormac. She's carrying weight. Slow. She'd look for water. But she's a town woman. She doesn't know the land. Tapped a spot on the map. This wash here, it's the most direct route to the old San Pedro Trail. But there was a storm yesterday. A big one. He looked up at Cormac. If she was in that wash, she's dead, drowned and buried under a ton of mud. And if she wasn't, Cormac pressed, then she got lucky, Sterling rasped. Or someone helped her. He ran a hand over his scruffy jaw. The only people who'd be out in that storm are the ones who know how to survive it. Apaches, Cormac breathed. The thought was a complication he hadn't considered. It changed everything. Find her, Sterling, Cormac ordered, his voice low and dangerous. I don't care who she's with. I don't care what you have to do. Just bring her back to me. Sterling gave a thin-lipped smile that was more of a snarl. For $1,000, Mr. Lynch, he said, turning to leave. I'd track a ghost through hell itself. He left without another word. A few minutes later, Cormac watched from his window as the wiry tracker rode out of town, heading east. He was a hound loosed on the scent, and Cormac Lynch had just unleashed a monster he wasn't sure he could control. Life in Kyle's hidden canyon was a world away from everything Nora had ever known. Her days were no longer measured by a town clock, but by the rising and setting of the sun. The fear she'd carried for so long was slowly, day by day, replaced by a quiet respect for the man who had saved her. And then, a tentative trust. Kyle was a patient teacher. He showed her which plants were medicine and which were poison, how to find water just by watching the birds. He taught her the silence of the hunter and the awareness of the hunted. The desert she had seen as a barren wasteland was, in fact, teeming with life, with its own harsh, simple laws. Her body, soft from town life, grew stronger. Her hands, once smooth, became calloused and capable. But the biggest change was inside her. The shame that Stone Creek had burned into her soul began to peel away under the vast, indifferent sky. Out here, she wasn't a sinner. She was a survivor, a mother-to-be. Her pregnancy wasn't a disgrace. It was a sign of hope. Their bond was forged in the shared quiet of evenings by the fire. He would speak of his people, of his lost wife, Nita, and his 2 small children. Nora, in turn, spoke of Thomas, sharing memories she had locked away, letting his goodness live again in the telling. They were 2 solitary people, bound by a shared geography of grief. As the weeks turned into months, her time grew near. The babies grew heavy inside her, and a new ancient anxiety took hold. To give birth here, so far from any help, was a terrifying thought. It happened one night, under a full moon. The first pains came sharp and fast. Panic seized her, but Kyle was a rock of calm. He had seen this before. He had helped deliver his own children. He built up the fire, boiled water with cleansing herbs he'd gathered, and spoke to her in a low, soothing voice. He told her to breathe, to be strong like the mountain. The labor was a long, primal battle in the heart of the wilderness, a struggle of pain and life under the silent gaze of the stars. Through it all, Kyle was there. He held her hand, wiped the sweat from her brow, and offered his own strength when hers began to fade. Just before dawn, the first cry of a newborn split the night. A son, small but perfect. Nora wept with relief and joy, but it wasn't over. As Kyle cleaned and wrapped the first baby, the pains returned with a vengeance. The second child, a daughter, was born an hour later, just as the first rays of the sun crested the canyon wall. Exhausted but euphoric, Nora held her children in her arms, a boy and a girl, Benjamin and Sarah. They were here, they were alive. She looked at Kyle, his face streaked with dirt and fatigue. She saw not a warrior, not an Apache, but the man who had delivered her children, the man who had saved all three of their lives. "Thank you, Kyle," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He simply nodded, his eyes on the tiny infants. For a moment, the mask of the stoic warrior fell away, and she saw in his face a deep, aching longing for the family he had lost, and a fierce, protective devotion to the new one he had just found. The next few weeks were a blur of sleeplessness and quiet joy. The canyon, once just a shelter, became a home, filled with the small, miraculous sounds of new life. Nora discovered a well of maternal love inside her she never knew she possessed, and Kyle was a natural father. He would hold the infants with a gentleness that was breathtaking to watch, murmuring to them in his own language. He fashioned a cradle board for each of them, so Nora could carry them securely on her back. It was a fragile, precious piece, and Nora knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it could not last. Cormac Lynch was not a man who gave up. The blow came on a quiet afternoon. Kyle had been gone for hours, hunting on the higher mesas. Nora was sitting outside the wickiup, nursing Sarah, while Benjamin slept soundly nearby. Suddenly, Kyle appeared at the mouth of the canyon. He wasn't moving with the easy stride of a hunter. He moved with the silent urgency of an animal sensing danger. His face was a grim mask. "We have to leave," he said, his voice low and tight. He didn't need to explain why. "He found us," she breathed, her blood turning to ice. "Not yet, but his tracker is close. Too close." He pointed to a distant ridge, invisible to Nora's untrained eye. "I found his sign. A man who rides a shod horse, but walks like one of the people. He is skilled. He found the trail I left covering our tracks from the storm. He has been hunting us for weeks." The peaceful bubble of their existence burst. The whispers of hope were being drowned out by the approaching hoofbeats of her past. "He is one man," Kyle continued, his mind already working, planning. "But he is the wolf that scouts for the pack. Where he is, others will follow. Cormac will have promised him a great deal of money." Panic rose in Nora's throat, hot and suffocating. "What do we do? We have the babies, Kyle. We can't run." Kyle came to her and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. He looked down at the children, his children in every way that mattered now, and his jaw hardened with resolve. "We will not run," he said, his voice a blade of steel. "We will disappear. There are places in these mountains the white man does not know, places where the rocks themselves forget who has passed. But we must go. Now. Pack only what you can carry. The water, the children, nothing else." The idyllic peace was over. The hunt was on. As Nora quickly gathered what they needed, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, she looked at the two precious, vulnerable lives she had brought into this world. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a mother, and she would walk through fire to keep them safe. The flight from the canyon was a desperate, harrowing nightmare. Their world shrank to the next step, the next breath, the next safe place to hide. Kyle moved with a purpose that bordered on superhuman, his knowledge of the unforgiving landscape their only shield. He led them not along trails but through a labyrinth of rockfalls and narrow gorges, a route designed to break a trail and confuse any pursuit. Nora, with Sarah strapped to her back and Benjamin held against her chest, followed without a word. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest. The babies, as if sensing the danger, were miraculously quiet. They traveled by night, hiding during the brutal heat of the day in impossibly concealed caves and crevices. Kyle moved with a heightened awareness, his senses strained, listening for any sign of the man who hunted them. He was a ghost in his own land, and he was teaching Nora and his new family to be ghosts as well. Days blurred into a grueling routine of flight and fear. Nora saw the toll the constant vigilance was taking on him. He ate little, slept less. His face grew leaner, his eyes holding the haunted look of a man at war. This wasn't just about a promise anymore. This was a father protecting his family. One evening, as they rested in the deep shadow of a granite spire, Kyle returned from a scouting trip, his expression darker than she had ever seen it. "He is still behind us," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He is like a shadow that cannot be shaken. He is clever. He is not following our tracks directly. He is thinking as I would, cutting across the land to where he expects us to go." "He's cornering us," Nora realized, her voice trembling. Kyle nodded grimly. "There is a pass to the west, through the Cinder Hills. It is our only way out of this basin. He knows this. He will be waiting for us there." A profound despair settled over Nora. They were trapped. "What can we do?" Kyle checked his rifle, his movements precise and deadly. He looked at Nora, at the babies, and his gaze was filled with a terrible resolve. "There is only one thing to do," he said. "The prey can no longer run. The prey must become the hunter." His plan was simple and lethally dangerous. They would continue towards the pass, making it look like they were walking right into the trap. But just before they reached it, Nora would hide with the children, and Kyle would double back. He would use the terrain to ambush the tracker. It was one man against another, a final, decisive confrontation in the heart of the wilderness. The next 24 hours were the longest of Nora's life. Every step towards that pass felt like a step towards a waiting grave. When they reached the designated spot, a dense thicket of bushes at the base of a cliff, Kyle turned to her. He touched Benjamin's cheek, then Sarah's, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle. He looked into Nora's eyes. "Stay here. No matter what you hear, do not move from this spot until I return. Do you understand, Elonora?" She could only nod, her throat tight with fear. He squeezed her shoulder, a silent promise, and then he melted into the rocks and shadows, becoming one with the landscape. Nora huddled in the thicket, making herself as small as possible, her body a shield for her children. She listened. The silence was absolute, a terrifying empty canvas. An hour passed, then another. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of blood and fire. Then she heard it. The sharp, unmistakable crack of a rifle shot echoed through the hills. Her heart leaped into her throat. She bit down on her hand to keep from crying out. Silence. Then another shot. Closer this time. It was followed by a third. And then a yell, a cry of rage and pain that was cut brutally short. After that, the silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. Nora waited, every nerve screaming. Every minute was an eternity. Was Kyle alive? Was he wounded? Or was the tracker, this man named Sterling, now making his way towards her hiding spot? She drew the small knife from her waistband, the same one she had carried from Stone Creek. It felt foolishly small, but it was all she had. She would not let him take her children. Just as the last light faded from the sky, a figure emerged from the twilight gloom. Nora's heart stopped. She raised the knife. "Nora!" a low voice called. It was Kyle. He stumbled into the clearing, and she saw that he was hurt. He was clutching his left arm, and blood, dark in the dim light, seeped through his buckskin shirt. His face was grim, etched with pain, but he was alive. She rushed to him, helping him sit. "Kyle, you're shot." "It is a graze," he said, his voice strained. "The bullet passed through the muscle. It is not deep." He looked at her, his eyes full of a new urgency. "The tracker is dead." A wave of relief so powerful it made her dizzy washed over Nora, but Kyle's expression stopped her. "Before he died," Kyle grated out, pain tightening his jaw, "he told me something. Cormac is not waiting in Stone Creek." He grew impatient. He and a posse of his men. "They are a day's ride behind the tracker. They are coming." The relief vanished, replaced by a cold, numbing dread. They had won the battle, but the war was now at their doorstep. They had escaped the wolf, only to find the entire pack was bearing down on them. Kyle was wounded. They were exhausted, and they were trapped in a basin with an armed posse hunting them. Their desperate flight for survival was about to become a final, bloody stand. There was no time to rest, no time for pain. With Cormac's posse just a day behind, Kyle, fighting off the fever from his wound, led them deeper into the rocks. He took them to a defensible fissure in a canyon wall, a place the old ones called the Place of Echoes. It was a natural fortress, with only one narrow way in. As Nora settled the babies into a sheltered alcove, she found herself humming the lullaby Thomas had always favored, a desperate attempt to soothe her children and her own frayed nerves. 3 steps north of the crying stone. Look to the shadow the serpent casts. The words were no longer just a song. Suddenly it all clicked into place. The crying stone, a weeping rock formation they had passed days ago. The great serpent, a tall spire of rock that cast a long shadow at noon. It was the map. It had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. A riddle of words that only she, who had heard the song 1,000 times, could possibly solve. Thomas hadn't just left her his children, he'd left her a weapon. By mid-morning they were discovered. Cormac's voice, full of arrogant triumph, echoed into the canyon. "Elonora, I know you're in there. Send out the Apache and I promise you and the child will be shown mercy." Her fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "Let us all go free, Cormac," she shouted back, her voice bouncing off the canyon walls. "And I'll give you what you want. The location is in my head." A brief, tense silence followed, then a snarled reply. "His life for yours. That's my only offer, Elonora." The deal was impossible. A lie. He would kill Kyle. Then he would kill her and take the children. The crack of a rifle from outside signaled the end of negotiations. The siege began. It was short and brutal. As dusk began to fall, providing cover, Cormac and 2 of his men rushed the entrance. Kyle's rifle barked. One man fell. Nora, her hand surprisingly steady on the heavy Winchester rifle Kyle had given her, fired. The shot sent the second man stumbling back into the rocks, screaming. But Cormac was through. His face was a mask of pure fury. He charged the weakened Kyle, knocking him to the ground, his rifle skittering away. Seeing Kyle being overpowered, Nora lunged forward, no longer a frightened widow, but a lioness protecting her cubs. She plunged her small knife deep into Cormac's side. He roared in pain and fury, backhanding her so hard she fell, her head striking the rock. The world swam in a sea of black. Through the haze, she saw him raise his own knife to strike her down. But the momentary distraction was his undoing. Kyle, with a final, desperate surge of strength, grabbed the pistol Cormac had dropped in the struggle. The shot was deafening in the small space. Cormac froze. A look of stunned disbelief washed over his face. He looked down at the hole in his chest, then back at Kyle. Then he collapsed to the ground, the dust settling around his still form. The remaining posse members, seeing their leader fall, panicked. They fled into the growing darkness, their retreat a scatter of clumsy, terrified footsteps. And then silence descended. Nora crawled to Kyle's side. They were wounded, exhausted, bleeding. But they were alive. In the quiet of the canyon, she looked from the man who had honored a promise and protected her family to the sleeping children he had saved. The silver fortune meant nothing. The true treasure wasn't buried in the earth. It was right here, in the life they had fought for, in the family they had become. Together they would leave the ghosts of Stone Creek and the curse of the serpent's tooth behind, and they would find a new place to call home. And so the story of Elonora and Kyle comes to a close. But their journey was far from over. They did not seek out the serpent's tooth silver. The ghosts of greed and violence that surrounded it were too high a price to pay. Instead, they traveled north, seeking a place of peace where they could raise their children, Benjamin and Sarah, as a new family. A testament to the idea that honor and love can bridge any divide. Theirs is a story etched into the very soul of the American West. A tale of survival against impossible odds, of finding humanity in the most unexpected of places, and of discovering that the truest definition of a father is not found in blood, but in the unwavering courage to protect those you love. Thank you for joining us on this journey back in time. If this story of resilience and unlikely bonds moved you, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with others who appreciate epic tales from the Old West. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you won't miss our next story. We're dedicated to bringing history's most dramatic and often forgotten sagas to life. We'll see you next time.